How do you say that in Swiss? Good morning.
Guten Morgen.
Guten Morgen.
It's good. It's good.
And in Chinese, you say 早上好.
Okay. Okay, I'm not going to try
There'll
that.
be a test later.
Great. I love these, just casual morning discussions, about life, future, and technology.
I think it's perfect.
I think it's perfect.
It's the best way to start the day.
So I want to get started. Maybe just a quick background to your journey, right? So where did your journey start, just quickly?
So I was born over 40 years ago. You want to go back that far? Maybe we'll talk about Tencent, or you want to go even deeper?
Yeah.
We can do the whole thing if you like.
Human history, the whole thing. Yeah.
But I've been with Tencent for almost 20 years now, and I was doing investments in China since 1997, helping. In the mid-90s was a time when foreign multinationals were really trying to figure out how do you enter the China market. All the big names around the world. And I was really fascinated by that process, and I was an investment advisor or a management consultant specifically for firms to enter China. And I started working with a South African company in 1999 called the Naspers Group. Actually recently did an IPO here in Europe, a company called Prosus, which is actually Tencent and some other assets now listed. It has become one of the largest listed companies in Europe. Just recently, for those of you who manage mutual funds or things like that, take a look at it. But anyways, I was helping them enter China, and in the year 2000, I met the Tencent executive team and was really excited about them, and we bought roughly half the company in the year 2001, and when we did that, I joined the executive team. The company was about 45 people at that time. Now we're closer to 50,000, depends how you measure it, because we have different types of subsidiaries and partner relationships, but it's been a really exciting journey going from that kind of China. You don't have garage-based startups, but you have them usually in converted manufacturing facilities, in big buildings that used to make textiles or something like that, and it was in one of these types of environments, very much a startup, to now one of the largest companies in the world in terms of market capitalization. So it's been a long ride.
So you did an investment that was just about half the company, right? Which was
Correct.
kind of an interesting stake. We talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a venture investment, really. It was more of like a joint venture sort of investment behind it.
Yeah. I think we still haven't really figured out how to characterize it. And these are the kinds of investments in my own career that I really enjoy doing the most, to be quite honest with you. I like to do unique transactions, which are only unique because they're done so infrequently. But to me, what makes perfect sense is to buy 40% of a company, 50% of a company, even 70% of a company. And the way that works for us, whether it's going back to Naspers, in my original experience with Tencent, or now as Tencent doing these types of investments in other companies. I think Supercell might actually apply to this kind of model. We leave the management team alone. So you have to completely have trust in the management team, the founders that are involved in the company. And you basically, on an average day, you stay away from the company, but when the company needs help, or when they come to you asking for help, then you have to execute at the highest possible level to prove your value, to prove this is a valuable relationship. So you default to trust on a daily basis, you leave the company alone, and then when they need help, you ratchet up the...
You kind of jump in. But you did join the Tencent management when you
since
came
2001. Yeah, I've been part of the executive team. I gave myself... this title of Chief Exploration Officer probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and I can explain what that is.
Your business card says CEO, right?
No, CXO. Yeah, let's have no mistake there. I'm definitely the CXO. Yeah, small e.
Small e.
Yeah, very small.
Yeah.
Sorry. No hidden meaning there, guys. Small enough.
Small enough. But so 20 years. So I want to jump into ecosystems. So that's kind of the background there.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to focus the conversation a little bit about initially around ecosystems. Like, how do you encourage growth and development like that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you grew from 45 to 50,000 employees in that sense. That's a 1,000-fold increase. It's not bad in 20 years. And how do you keep that growth alive, right, in those ecosystems? Like, how do you drive, like, what new areas are you looking into? I mean, Wechat, for example, the Chinese economy runs on Wechat, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy. All my Chinese friends, you're nobody without Wechat.
Yeah.
How do you keep that ecosystem alive and kind of growing?
Yeah, it's something we've been learning over the years. Like when I was mentioning joining the company about 19 years ago, we had a platform called QQ. Many people have heard of Wechat, which is awesome, but until recently, actually, there's a platform called QQ that's actually been the same size as Wechat, and that started in 1999. So we've really been learning about ecosystems for over 20 years now, and then when we started building Wechat, probably about 10 years ago, in 2009, I think, it was kind of an opportunity to take all the learnings we had with QQ, this other platform, which is an instant messaging platform similar to WeChat in many ways, but it started on the PC, and then it kind of moved to mobile from there, because 20 years ago, you didn't really have mobile internet, not in the way you do today. But we've just been refining our knowledge over time. I think for our company, it's come quite naturally in a way, because basically from the early part of the year 2000, so almost over 19 years now, we've had almost the entire internet on our platforms, which was originally QQ. Mm-hmm. So the entire thinking from the company, from the early days, from when I've been involved, is how do we not mess this up? Can we keep this going? Can we keep almost ourselves close to 100% penetration in the market? So we just had to keep improving what we're doing all the time. And then, as much as we're concerned about adding users to our network, we're also concerned about churn, losing your users because something better comes along, someone does something in a fresher, more exciting way, and you lose them. So we kept thinking about that every day. How can we add so much value to our users that they will stay? And what would be the trend that will come next that might pull the users away from us? Well, and so that's really how we got into online gaming in 2003, is we were thinking these online gaming environments are highly compelling real-time environments for people, more compelling than text messaging or voice alone, which was what QQ was, and what WeChat kind of is at its core. It's text messaging, voice, things like that. So we started doing online gaming as a richer environment for people to interact on the internet together, and we designed it as kind of an add-on to our core network. And from building these services ourselves, we could see how there's this very nice marriage between having a contact list, having communication at the core, and then being able to add services to that, like gaming or now financial services and all kinds of areas. But it's really about, at the end of the day, first of all, when you think about this, you have to think about user value. Because if you don't care about users, if you lose sight of user value, your business will start crumbling. You won't be able to last for 20 years if you don't care fundamentally about people, if you don't care about your users. When you go into a mindset deeply about that, then you just think about what are all the additional services that they're going to need, whether they realize it or not sometimes. You have to think about the human needs of people, and then you realize when there's so many needs out there that you're not going to be able to satisfy all those things yourself. So we do a lot of investments. We make hundreds of investments in the market. We really learned over the years, how do you create more of an open platform? So WeChat is very open to doing almost anything in there. You can build apps in WeChat now. There's actually an app environment, so it feels a little bit more like a kind of OS or a kind of a resource where you could just build your app inside WeChat. There's payments built in there. There's all kinds of resources. And I think that's the goal, is really thinking about how you can offer as much opportunity to the broader market as possible with your core resource.
I have a question I want to add in there on the payment side of things, right? So from what I understand, WeChat has become the way to pay in China, right? Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we tried to, in Switzerland, people tried to build a couple of mobile payment solutions, right? That kind of people tried to roll out, mostly the banks. Not always sure how user-centric that concept was. But what drove that adoption? Is it because people were already using WeChat, or what kind of drove you guys to do the payment solution? Was it kind of like just a natural step?
Well, so we had been doing payment platforms since 2005. Just as a fun fact, this will be lost in the annals of history, but we started doing our payments actually by people picking up a fixed line phone. Remember those used to exist? Some of the young people in the room may not have known there was like a line coming out of a phone. You'd pick it up and you would dial what's called an IVR number, a special number. Yeah. And when you dialed that number, it would credit your QQ account, your Tencent account with credit. And the mobile operator, the telco actually, would take 50% of the fees. We didn't like that very much. So then we started working.
Can't imagine why.
Yeah. I mean, 50% is really high. So then we started working with credit cards and so on and so forth. But it's always been a strategic priority for the company to develop payment systems. And so we've been doing that roughly since 2005, like I was saying. When WeChat came up, it was originally very experimental and really more about transferring money between people, because we were always thinking, for 20 years now, we operate platforms that are really about peer-to-peer relationships, communicating with someone and then having some kind of valuable experience between the two people. Mm-hmm. And we were always thinking, well, what if we can just, in addition to sending a voice call or a picture or something to someone, what if we could also send money? And it really started off with this idea. This is how I recall it behind the scenes, and there were a lot of discussions going on at Tencent, but I remember talking about this. We had a lunch one day, and this always sticks in my mind, where the discussion was like, what if like you have your cell phone and I have my cell phone, and what if we can just like swipe it really fast, like using the camera, And yeah, like what if this is the same thing as giving you cash? Like I swipe this, and that's like, usually I would have to take some paper stuff out of my pocket, and I would have to give it to you.
Yeah.
But why can't this be the same thing as that person-to-person cash transaction? And actually, we do it with QR codes. Maybe I'll pull this up. I don't want to waste time, but like, let's see. Okay. Maybe you guys can see this here. Can you see that QR code? This is how it's done. You would use your camera, and you're going to scan my QR code.
Yeah.
Right? Are you in Wechat? You're going to get some cash. I think this would actually make you give me money, which is totally fine. But anyways,
sorry.
but you get the idea. That's really, it wasn't, to me, of course we were interested to send money between each other.
Okay.
But there was this whole thing about this hand-to-hand, in person, looking in the eyes and saying, okay, nice to do business with you. I'll have the carrots, the beets, and the cabbage. And maybe that's like 3 or 4 francs. How could we make that better than cash in the market? Because you don't have, a shopkeeper in China, especially if you're selling cabbage or carrots, you have to have like this metal box with all this cash in it.
Yeah.
And we said there's got to be a better way, because sometimes it feels very threatening to run around at the end of the day with a metal box. So how could we just make it secure?
And here you don't even know if you're giving money or taking money, right? So
yeah, it's all good, right?
It's all good. But it makes a lot of sense. So
now we're getting existential.
Yeah, it's very existential, but it's cool, right? You're saving on logistics, right? Saving the planet in the process.
Yeah.
But I think so. So it started off with the peer-to-peer.
Yeah,
kind of like
then it
Venmo,
just grew.
Right?
People wanted to do it. Of course, we wanted them to do it too. So we would talk about it. We would say, give this a try. But if your service isn't perfect, if we had problems in the back end, any problem with the service, it could be a reverse effect. Everything we do as a company now, because we're always large scale, the bar is very high. People also ask about, how do I enter China and things like that. And working with us can also be a challenge, because we deal with over 1 billion users, well over 1 billion with Wechat. So you want to go into that Wechat community, you want to offer your service, it's really prime time. And the challenge to meet the needs of such a community is you need to be ready to go. And when we provide a service, then the bar is even higher. So there's a lot of pressure to every day make sure that experience is going well, it's secure, it functions as planned. And so that's really the challenge, is to make sure that you can operate at that kind of scale day in and day out, 24/7. Because the moment you have a hiccup, it can really tarnish the brand of the company.
And the user experience is really key as well.
Absolutely.
The focus is 100% on how can I make this as simple as possible for the user.
Yeah. Now, sometimes, just as a note, for China, the UI can look a little different. Like, we think we have a good sense of what Chinese users expect, but that is a market that over time has such defined expectations about what a good user interface is that it may not look the same to someone from the West. If you look at some Chinese websites, there's all kinds of information on it. You would just be like, how can anyone work through that? It should be like Google, one little search bar, that's it. But that's not the way the Chinese market evolved to be intuitive. And so you just have to know your market and make your service as intuitive as possible for the target.
I guess that's also a piece of advice if anybody here is looking to enter China as well, right?
Yeah.
To really work with people on the ground with different cultural values.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to know the local users. And there has been, there's major internet players like us in China now operating for, like I said, like 20 years. So that has shaped user expectations. And when you go into that market, you should embrace that. Just like if you're coming here, you need to know about like Facebook and Twitter and all these other platforms. China will have its equivalent of those kinds of platforms, and you have to understand the market and embrace it. And I think they're also pretty different. Like Wechat is a very different kind of service than the other kind of parallels to it. So you just have to understand that and embrace that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I want to shift gears a little bit, because we talked about this earlier. But some challenges outside of the existing aspects there. A lot of the things that you look at as chief exploration officers out there, like some of the bigger topics that are facing us as on a global scale, not just in China, but also in the West. What topics, like what areas are you most interested in personally at the moment?
Thank you, yeah. If you have a title like Chief Exploration Officer, that sets the bar pretty high, right? Because you've all kind of thrown it down saying, I'm going to do something cool, right?
The final frontier.
Yeah, I mean, so you kind of stack the cards against yourself every day. About probably 6-7 years ago, actually, I started feeling, I've always, at Tencent, by the way, being part of the management team, I've always wanted to think about what's next, what the new technology is, what can Tencent do to really broaden our business, broaden our value to our customers, and give us some new growth opportunities. But to be quite honest, over time, I was starting to feel a little bit empty by it. Maybe it's kind of part of the success of the company, and this is just a personal story. Everyone at Tencent has their own personal experience. But for me, I started feeling like okay, if we set our eyes on a certain area, we can probably achieve it. And then I started thinking more like, okay, what's really valuable if we're growing as a company? What is the unique value we can contribute, taking advantage of this historical opportunity to have, over 1 billion people in Wechat and so on and so forth. And I started feeling like just latching on to the next technology fad was a bit empty, to be honest. And I was doing that for many years, and I don't want to point the finger at any technology saying it's good or bad, but let's just take VR. Like before, when I hear VR is coming out, I'd want to be the first person to try and figure it out and maybe invest in a couple companies and just figure out what VR is. And I started feeling over time like, you know what? That really isn't the most important thing. The most important thing right now is the most important thing on Earth. And why am I not thinking more about that? And it just never, it seems like that's kind of a new type of thinking in business, to be honest. Here, let me explain a little bit more clearly. So about 6 years ago or so, I started thinking more like just systematically. We had the time to do this, obviously. If you're struggling as a company, you have no time, you're just trying to survive. But once you can step back a little bit after 14 years or so, you say, I started thinking, what are the biggest challenges on Earth? What are they? Like, where are we going as humanity? We've got maybe 7.7 billion people on Earth today. I started thinking about the really big questions. And the more I was digging into them, I started thinking about things like agriculture, something I had never thought about before. I would just be like anyone else, line up, get your hamburger, your fries, and move on with your day, move on to more important things, right? But the more I started looking into these aspects of just breaking down things on the planet, very simply, 7.7 billion people, everyone needs to eat, you have something called global agriculture, I started becoming really worried. And then the more because there's a lot of stress in agriculture, maybe people aren't aware, everything from topsoil management to water stress to monoculture and the dangers of monoculture. And then you look at climate change, how that makes everything more complicated. And the more I was digging into this, the more it seemed like kind of humanity was heading for a bit of a crisis point because there's so many demands on the everyday things we need and so little solutions for it and so little understanding about some of the complicated aspects of these things, like just taking agriculture, for example, again. So I started thinking, going the other way around, what are the most important problems on Earth that need to be solved, and then how can we embrace technology? Especially, I'm more interested in breakthrough technologies, going back to the VR thing, the new thing that's coming. I wanted to think, okay, for the stuff that's understood, we can probably have other people handle that, like mobile services or something that's an internet-based service. There's a lot of hackers out there that know how to build this stuff. But what about that next phase of artificial intelligence or genetic engineering or something
fundamental
like that?
Technology development.
Because I would see that as expanding the portfolio of options that humanity has to deal with like a global challenge, a planetary scale challenge, like agriculture, like the need for everyone to eat healthy. And the thing is, I often felt before that these problems were solved. Like, if I'm living in the Western world, there's always a lot of choices. What are you talking about? Food problems? Like
clean water, no problem.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes when you're living in a developed country, it's very easy to feel like the problem is solved. Let's move on to higher level issues. But when you look at the underpinnings
like
of
cat emojis on your phone, right?
Yeah,
the higher
exactly.
Level issues. Yeah.
But when you look at the underpinnings, just like energy, I don't think people doubt, the energy that we have today in many parts of the world. You have these beautiful lights on and wonderful space heating. We're all very comfortable sitting in our seats, But often behind the scenes is a coal-fired plant. And so, the thing that made us comfortable at that moment was actually something that was weakening the fabric of the planet, really, with coal and CO2 emissions and all the toxins and things like that. So sometimes the progress can be illusory or temporary. Like, you're solving that problem today, but you might have much bigger problems in the future. Like antibiotics, you can use them up today. You can use them in what probably many physicians would consider to be irresponsible ways. And you did take care of your problem, but you're actually leading to a bigger problem in the future with antimicrobial resistance and so on and so forth. So I became very interested in how do we develop a very resilient planet, really, that when we, as humanity, when we do the things we need to do every day, like having these lights running, we're doing it in a way that could last for thousands of years without impacting our planet. Like, the goal is really, let's re-architect Earth now so we know humanity can keep going, and it's highly scalable, so we could go to 12 billion people on Earth, maybe 20 billion people on Earth. You could actually see how that architecture, as you build it up, could scale to many, many people. And I think this is like the big challenge ahead of us. But the more I started thinking about it, the more, at first I didn't have much confidence that maybe this was the right thing for Tencent, the right thing for myself. because no one was talking about this. But then I started talking to my colleagues at Tencent about these topics, and they were getting really excited. And they were thinking more, what can we do at Tencent? How can we message these things to our communities in China? So there's kind of an information sharing aspect, a content aspect, and then there's a technology aspect that I'm really driving now. And we've invested in a lot of companies, and we're still figuring out how we can make more of an impact. But this is really what I'm focused on, like every day now as the CXO, is driving these kind of technologies.
Take an example there, right? So energy production on a global level, right? So global warming, obviously a big problem in there. You mentioned it, coal-fired power plants. You know, China obviously growing energy demand there. Solar taking off in these areas, right? I saw a talk from Al Gore a couple days ago, and you know, there's a lot of talk about how solar is becoming cheaper than coal and a lot of other fossil fuel-based power generation tools. How do you like? Where does Tencent slot into that? Like, how do you go in there? Are you guys like open to investing in new developments in photovoltaic cells, or how do you go about that?
Well, this is a question. I mean, this is a good question to ask me because it's my responsibility to figure that out. Tencent historically hasn't done anything in with power generation. It's totally new for us. So, yeah, it's excellent. I think we have to add unique value if we're going to do something as a company. To me, what's missing in global energy markets now is a robust intelligence layer. And let me, just using power generation or energy, there's two areas I think where it's particularly interesting. One is actually making supply and demand on the grid more intelligent. So because you have to incorporate renewables, and renewables are intermittent. So you're going to have a lot of wind power at certain points, you're going to have a lot of sun power, and then it goes away, right? So how can you actually more intelligent kind of marry the supply with the demand? That supply of, in some cases, excess wind power or solar power with demands in the economy, with demands in the country. And this is happening all the time, by the way. You have to perfectly, at any point in time, you have to perfectly match the demand with supply in energy, right? But how can you use artificial intelligence this is a question that we have. I'm not saying we've proven it, but this is really the challenge for humanity. The challenge for every energy system on the globe is there a way, by using software, using intelligence, that you can more perfectly match up those needs? So for example, maybe you make major appliances in the economy, like air conditioners, HVAC units, that's larger scale air conditioners, or water heaters, so on and so forth. Make them intelligent. So they actually are responsive to low prices with energy, and low prices would equate excess renewable energy, because the stuff's like, renewable energy is almost like no marginal cost. You get a lot of it. It just means the windmill is spinning more. You have more solar on the photovoltaics. So how do you marry that more perfectly? It might be at certain points of the day, the HVAC system is working harder because it's using up intelligently that, exactly. And what you're doing is you're actually lowering the prices that you would pay as a consumer for
so you could do
the energy.
Something like dynamic energy pricing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that.
So this is just something that I'm very interested in, and we'd love to find more opportunities to do research and development. So that's different than rolling out a product, to be clear. I'm not saying that Tencent has a product. What I'm saying is someone in the company who's very interested in this. We have an AI team that's interested to do all kinds of R&D projects, and this is one area where I'd really like to find more opportunities for us to do that. But it doesn't have to be Tencent. It could be, I would just love to see more startups doing this around the planet. I'm going to talk about this later today as well for the hacking team, because I think I've been hearing there's a discussion, if I could just say for a moment. There's a discussion here in Europe, what does Europe do with AI? And sometimes in these discussions, which I have been invited to a few of them, there's kind of like almost a sense of hopelessness. Like, okay, US is doing all this in AI, and China is doing all this in AI. What's Europe going to do to catch up? And my response to that is like, guys, show me one company, and I know there's some companies doing this in Europe, by the way, but show me, who's the dominant company doing AI for energy right now? This is wide open. There are companies doing interesting things, but there's so much to be done, and there's so many opportunities, whether it's by geography, by nation, by application. This is so perfect for Europe, and it's by no means even really being explored earnestly, not compared to other types of apps, like maybe self-driving cars. Probably all of us have a friend or something like that. You're doing something with self-driving cars. We can't wait to get the applications out there. Obviously, it's going to be exciting, but when you think about all the talent focused on making sure that a human doesn't have to drive versus making sure our energy systems globally operate intelligently. Meanwhile, there's going to be a climate strike in a few hours here in Switzerland. I mean, there's a bit of a mismatch in the technology between the global concern about certain areas and the talent willing to tackle.
How much do you think that has to do with what people want to talk about, right? Like, who here can imagine what a self-driving car would look like? Some might even have a Tesla, right? But who here can imagine what an AI solution would look like for a power grid, right?
Not many hands went up.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's pretty rare. I think that's
it's not very, and it's not anthropomorphic, and it doesn't seem like, well, what's in it for me kind of a thing. When people think about robotics, they often think about the humanoid robot, not the autonomous greenhouse. You know, it's also robotics, but it doesn't look like a human. It just kind of grows food more productively. It's hard for us to imagine things that don't look like a person or we don't necessarily touch with our own, physically. But these are really, really important things for humanity to get right. And that's where we have to apply more attention. This is where, I don't know if there's many regulators in the room here, but that's where really, regulators, governments, it would be nice if they could get more in the game, to be honest, and also the utilities, but they might need pressure as well. Their job is to very precisely and reliably deliver electrons, and they don't want to mess that up. And we celebrate that because we don't want the lights to go off right now, so they have to do their job. But then there also has to be a space to encourage them to innovate, right? And to separate that from the sensitive task of delivering that utility to.
I guess it's very similar to what you mentioned earlier with Wechat, right? You can't roll something out and kind of just hope it goes well to 1 billion people. Would be even more drastic if you just decided to play around with a power grid, right? You can't be like, sorry guys, no power for a couple days. We're doing some work. Use those candles, right? It's just can't do that.
But the first stage is really easy. It's really non-threatening because it's just about creating. Okay, so the way artificial intelligence will work is it means many things. It applies to many things. Just my own view of artificial intelligence. It's a lot like computer programming. It's a lot like coding because just think about how coding can be applied to any application. It can be any app. It's what you want to make out of it, and we're still discovering what it could do. I think AI is similar. You use data to optimize something. You use data to learn a strategy that you didn't know about, and that's what it is in the early days. Is you have to get longitudinal data for how something works, and then you can develop a simulator of that based on the model, looking at all the data of how something worked in the past. So then you can kind of build a virtual representation of that thing, like how a power plant works. Let's take a coal-fired plant. You would just need all this data of how much coal it used, how much water it used, temperatures, things like that. And then you can kind of develop an accurate simulator. And humanity's been building simulators for many things, aerospace and all kinds of areas for a long time. But you need an accurate simulator for that thing, which may not exist in the world. Once you have that, then your AI can discover potentially more superior strategies for how to operate the thing. And then as the plant owner or operator or manager, you can look at it and say, does that work? Does that make sense? Is that a big gain? Is that a small gain? And it's amazing how with AI, the AI can find strategies that aren't necessarily intuitive to human beings, which is really powerful because that means we can use AI to help us as humans learn. And we don't necessarily have to take us humans out of the loop because the AI was helping us understand the way the world works.
Just gives you a different view on that, right?
Can I give you an example? Because maybe this sounds a little confusing. I was just thinking now. We have a cooperation in the Netherlands with a university called Wageningen, and they're a leading university for agriculture, horticulture. Don't know if you've heard of them. They're absolutely amazing. Probably the best in the world at what they do. We've been working with them now for 2 years to develop artificial intelligence for greenhouses. And we had a competition that's ongoing now. I was just there a couple weeks ago. We did it last year, and we proved rather decisively that AI can grow food indoors more effectively than humans can. But what I wanted to say is we had 5 AI teams, including Tencent, Microsoft, Intel, a couple others. They were kind of, shall we say, competing against a human expert team from Wageningen. These are the experts at horticulture. And what the winning team did is they kept the lights on 24/7. And they optimize all the other factors in the greenhouse for constant saturation of photons, which I'm not in the space, but it seems like that's not the way it's done. And the human team, they're in this competition, they saw that the AI team was doing that, and they started to do the same thing. And you could see in their growth curve, because we were growing cucumbers, and you can see the productivity, how many cucumbers we're growing. when they changed their strategy to copy the AI, their productivity just went up. And this was not in their playbook for some reason. And you could interview them and figure out why. But the point is, you can very clearly see how humans seeing that something's working better using AI very quickly can say, oh, let's try that. And then they can...
It's almost counterintuitive maybe even, right?
Yeah. And the Microsoft team beat the human team by like 17%. We measured it in terms of net profit, but they were like...
How did the Tencent team do?
We were the best AI strategy, but we were second, I think. So we did good. I think we were pretty neck and neck with the human team. And now we're just sponsoring it. So we want to support all kinds of hackers and, like what we're doing today, teams around the world to figure out what the technology can do to drive progress in these areas, like water, energy, agriculture, so on and so forth. So many areas.
You mentioned it, that you're also trying to encourage others to solve these problems, right?
Yes.
Not just Tencent, not just you, just kind of go about that.
Yeah.
How do you think you can best encourage that? I think that a lot of people see AI as a little bit of a black box that solves problems, and it kind of sits there somewhere on the slides, and then the arrow goes through it, and the problem's solved on the other side. But how do you encourage people to go out there and look at tasks like that, right? I mean, you said you do a lot of research in that area. I guess you probably sponsor one or two chairs at some universities along those lines. But what do you personally believe is the best way to move that forward?
This is really the future of humanity question, isn't it? Because I think to really cope with all the challenges we're facing, we're going to need to encourage more people to get involved. And it's not something solved by any one company, but we want to do our part. Look, I think about this all the time. We want to talk about the challenges. I think, first of all, we have this framework that we talk about. It gets a lot of coverage in China called food, energy, and water. When we talk to people about this area and we get feedback from the market, it's amazing how most people just never thought about, like, where does their water come from and where does it go? Where does their food come from and where does it go? How does my energy get here? Like, I think most people probably walked in this room and it wasn't their first question, like, but maybe Swiss is more like that. But, like most people around the world are thinking, how are the lights being powered? How is the
first thing
cool?
We think of when we walk in?
Yeah, it's like, is this hydro or, how are we doing? But why not? Why not think about that? Because these are global challenges and global markets are, by definition, global. They're large. You can solve a problem with core technology that can be applicable to the entire planet. That's a very big market. So the first thing I think is knowledge and awareness. And we try to do our part, but if someone said we should be doing more, they're always right. They're always going to be right, because there's always something more you can do. Just sleep less, hire more people, right? I think, we try to...
Elon Musk approach.
Yeah. We invest a lot. We invest in hundreds of companies around the world, and we have teams that we really invest as a VC. So at the core, Tencent is an operating company. We operate all these services, but we also, in many respects, look like a venture capitalist because we act like a venture capitalist. This is really what I do. I have about 70 companies under me, and a team is based in Palo Alto.
And you do global investments?
Yeah, but mostly non-China. So we have Chinese teams doing investments in China. I'll do the teams in Palo Alto, so we see a lot of what comes through the Silicon Valley. I don't want to stress global because we're probably missing a lot. It's a huge planet out there.
Do you do any Swiss investments?
We'd be very happy to. I don't think I have done a Swiss investment yet. I don't think so. German, yes. Not
anybody has anything they'd like to pitch?
Yeah, but it would be great if it's in this area because, like this kind of planetary scale challenge area, that would be my main interest. And I really, that's the core for me. First, planetary challenges, and then breakthrough technologies. But so we do investments. Then, with our platforms themselves, like Wechat, we try to we make it so no one has to talk to us. Sometimes people say, "Hey, Dave, can you help me get on Wechat?" It's like, you know what? I'm so delighted to tell you that this really shouldn't be necessary. You shouldn't have to talk to me. Just go build it on Wechat. Like, all the resources should be there. All the information you need should be there. If you need some help, there's a lot of companies that help people get on Wechat. And then we have other services that are really ramping up at Tencent these days, like our cloud services, which is just hosting, mostly for China, but we do it globally. Payments as well, if you want to charge payments in China and sometimes other markets too. I don't know if it's in Switzerland now. WeChat Pay is in Switzerland. I'm not quite sure on the status there. Just things can move so fast. But we try to provide all these resources that companies can use, and still you would probably say it's not enough. The one thing that we probably have tended not to do, which is something that like maybe Google does, is actually spin up internal teams of hundreds of people to drive a specific application. So we're more about helping the ecosystem. Like in my work as the CXO, I really don't have operational teams that just do this stuff. So we're actually more about the ecosystem, more about doing just talks like today. Hopefully something's helpful.
Do you have teams for the exploration tasks that kind of look at these global challenges?
Yeah, but it's really more of an analytical and investment team. And then we have, we interface with all kinds of teams inside of Tencent, but it's kind of dotted line.
So you really do. So you really function as a venture arm.
Yeah, I think in a typical day, if you ask me what have I done for the company lately this week, I would probably try to say, I've done some kind of investment. We've done a follow-on, or because that feels very tangible when you've actually put money into the market, put it to work. I think, but honestly, there's just so many things happening throughout the company at all times, and we try to coordinate with different teams. Particularly our AI team working on certain research projects, which is all about proving that something could work and that it's valuable, and then sharing that depending on the case, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
perfect.
Yeah.
We have time for a handful of questions if you're up for that. So I'd love to open up for questions here in the audience. And does anybody have any questions? Oh, perfect.
Is it okay if I sit, or you want me to stand?
No, you can say. I just have to throw this thing in the audience.
It's if you're standing, I should stand too.
No. I just am tossing the mic out there. Please.
And could you it's nice for me if you could introduce yourself so I get a sense of who's who, just meeting people.
My name is Bedriya Hamza. I'm working for credit card issuer here in Switzerland.
Could you say it again, working for?
Credit card issuer.
Okay, credit card issuer.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I have two questions. First of all, about WeChat. I mean, we have seen the times here in Europe about the CompuServe and AOLs and so on. Can you compare that to the WeChat or the Chinese market at the moment? And the second part of the question is around energy. Is that energy problem not really solved because we have hydrogen where it can be produced and stored, the energy level, and then distributed over the gas lines? What's your take on that?
Okay. First question was CompuServe, AOL, are kind of saying how do you prevent yourself from being like a dinosaur and phased out?
Yeah, and
because I don't even know if
more on having open web versus one web ruled by a company like Facebook or WeChat.
Yeah. Okay, so more about CompuServe being like a closed model, something like that. Well, I think WeChat, it's kind of both, because we try to make it super easy for anyone to not just, I don't know if have you used it before? For those of you who haven't used it, it's a little complicated, but it looks like a messaging service, but then it has a lot of additional services and resources inside it. I think something we have this huge service called official accounts, which is kind of like having a website in WeChat. And now we actually let you build apps inside WeChat. To be honest, you don't have to use WeChat at all. If you don't want to, just go with something else. But we try to make it really easy for developers to build an app using the resources in WeChat, so you can get more teams, more people into this world of building an app, which sometimes can just look better and be more awesome, and spending less time to build it. So more people and spending less time. But it's up to the market to decide if it's valuable or not, obviously. So it's kind of a way of, in some ways, I guess you could say it's like its own ecosystem and environment, because to use those resources, you have to have WeChat running. Otherwise, you're in someone's browser, I think, right? You kind of have to have someone's app running or someone else's browser, and that browser might be Chrome by Google or IE by Microsoft, so on and so. So you kind of don't get away from it being in someone's environment, no matter what.
So WeChat's a bit of a browser as well. So it's kind of
yeah. I mean, think of it as like
OS,
a service
browser.
platform almost, and it has this payment stuff, and we just try to make it convenient both for teams to develop, other people in the world to use, and easy for it to be shared, which is very valuable if you're trying to get more users for something. If you want to sell more widgets, get people to talk about it virally. We provide that opportunity for that because it's really one click away from sharing with your friends. But we fight the battle every day. Is it worth it? Because someone else could provide something better. The thing about energy and storage. So my main point as an example before was about intelligence, right? To marry just demand and supply more intelligently. And my thinking in that model, just to be clear what I was saying, was that I'm actually thinking that there could be a model for some types of devices, and this is only high-level speculation from myself. Don't go away saying this is a Tencent strategy or oh my gosh, whatever. But what I'm saying is that what if the power utility if you could have a setting like in your refrigerator or your aircon at home, which could say, just give me the lower cost energy. And the power utility would constantly be sending information out to your device saying what the price is, and then you would have this setting like when it drops to a certain rate, or you can tell like there's a forecast within 24 hours or 6 hours, whatever, what the lowest rate is, that's when your room would be heated or cooled, or that's when the water would be heated. Because once the water is heated in a water heater, it'll stay warm for quite some time. So why don't you just use it when the wind is blowing or when the sun is out? You know?
Like part of it's like if you move towards dynamic energy pricing, how does that slot in? And in order to do that, you need to have a system that powers.
And so my thinking about that example, just to note, is like how can we make storage less necessary? It is going to be necessary. You're always going to have storage, especially if you have intermittent electricity. But how can you just reduce the demand for that? Because, for example, like when you look at a market and you're going to think about rolling electric vehicles out to the entire market, you get these really weird spikes. What happens is like everyone gets home at 6 or 7 o'clock and everyone just plugs in their car right now, and you get this massive spike of demand for energy. And like electric cars need a lot of energy. So everyone gets home, you have 1 million cars, and boom, 6 o'clock, you get this massive spike. What if rather you kind of paced it so you didn't have to have like all these additional plants, and sometimes they're not renewable, set up to meet that peak demand? Because as consumers, we just want to plug it in, turn on, and say, hey, where's my electricity? Like, I pay for this stuff. Like, where is it? But what it took to deliver that was all these coal-fired plants and biomass plants, the peaker plants, they had to pop up. So how do you just smooth out that curve so you don't have these peaks? So maybe you can kind of say, rather than getting it whenever you want it, you can say, why don't I help you get the lowest price? And so maybe it charges from 2 to 5 a.m., but as a consumer, you're cool with that because you're paying every day much less for that energy. So it's kind of win-win. But you didn't have to
optimizing the whole system versus.
So you didn't have to have as much storage, or you didn't have to now, because like this, like biomass stuff and methane gas or whatever. Biogas or whatever. This is all a form of storage, whether it's like archaeologically stored, like over millions of years, or you did it, last night through electrolysis and it's hydrogen or something. Like it's all like, is it new storage or old storage? Let's just reduce the need for storage, even though we recognize we're going to need it, but reduce those peaks. So that was my point there.
That makes sense.
It doesn't entirely answer your question.
I also think that if you do go in for storage at some point, you're going to have an efficiency loss at some point, regardless of what you use there. So if you can actually
just reduce the need for it, then you have less loss for storage and the energy loss there. Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. You'll be around for a little bit to chat, right?
Yes.
So if anybody has any other questions. Okay, we'll go for one more question. That was a very enthusiastic hand. Yeah, please, go ahead.
We got to give that question.
We'll keep it a short one, but yeah.
早上好, David. I'm Pascal from the Swiss Tech.
He just said hello, by the way, guys. That's good.
Okay,
That's very good.
Wasn't sure what that was.
Yeah, there will be a test later, remember?
Yeah.
All right, let's see if we're going to get ready for it. I'm writing for the Swiss Tech Garage blog, and I just wanted to ask you if you quickly could reiterate on the points, the biggest challenges we're facing. You said something about delivering food. I'm sure there's more challenges around. I'd love to see your personal point on maybe the 4 or 5 biggest ones, and what kind of tools you offer from Tencent to tackle them. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, say that the tools are in an evolutionary stage, and we need to be doing a lot more. Everyone needs to be doing a lot more. I don't want to say we're perfect, and definitely we're not in the position of trying to promote Tencent tools and sell you something, but saying society, globally, humanity needs to be working together to address solutions. I would say I do have an opinion on this. I think when you look at the key factors driving climate change, and what we must address as humanity because of climate change, to me, it's quite simple. The most important thing to address is food, energy, and water, called FEW. Food is like global agriculture. We have to address how do we feed ourselves at planetary scale, energy as well, and water. How do we make sure we have sufficient water? I know coming to Switzerland and talking about water, like there's a global water crisis, it may not seem like the most pressing challenge, but think about things from a planetary perspective and how you have shifting patterns of water on Earth. The thing that we've been thinking more about this, is when you start solving for one challenge, you're also solving for another one of those challenges. So just like a really quick data point, because I know we're out of time. If you look at, like, for example, the United States market, about 40% of the water in the US is used for agriculture, and another 40% is used for something called thermoelectric power generation. That means you apply heat to water, and then it makes something spin, and then you get electrons out of it. So 80% of America's water usage is for these two areas. So what if you could reduce the amount of water necessary for agriculture by 20%? And what if you could reduce the amount of water for electron generation by 20%. Like wind doesn't need water, solar doesn't need water. You've now addressed some water stress issues that you could have in water-stressed parts of the country, like Arizona, New Mexico. You've got desertification. You've got like all these challenges. Urban areas need to secure water, especially like the south part of California, San Diego, Santa Barbara, so on and so forth. You can go on and on. This is basically humanity. We have to make sure that we can feed ourselves, that we have enough water for our basic survival, and that we have energy, because with all of these humans on Earth now, 7.7 billion people, so much of the regulation of our societies and our economies depends on this energy input. And plus, the energy stuff is what's changing our planet in many cases, as well as agriculture, of course. So I would say like it's important for humanity to keep their eye on the ball, food, energy, and water, to stop the transition of the planet to this climate change state, and to also meet our needs as we're going to go through different stages of climate change, probably inevitably. Keep our eyes on the ball. Let's come up with more solutions for that. Have a better future, I hope.
Let's do this. Perfect. Thank you very much.